great TA leaders are great business leaders.
But you're a person providing a service to a product that is crucial in making your company's valuation as high as possible.
It's like, well, we don't need you anymore. We don't need you to make the output, which is the hire, so we don't need you at all.
The fact that TA, in my opinion, was never really involved in performance conversations blew my mind. Yeah, because we were running out of money otherwise, and not actually think, well, what could have been different? What could have happened now that we're seeing the market come back?
What do you think are the main things you'd be doing to show value in your organization?
If you're sitting here listening to this and you're like, oh, I probably couldn't tell you what our basic financials are, then how are you making good decisions?
Hello, I'm Chris Abbass, and this is Hiring on All Cylinders. And today I'm delighted to welcome Jessie Zwaan, Talentful's very own Chief Operating Officer and best-selling author.
Yeah.
There
Classic.
We go.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's really nice to be doing this. It's kind of weird though, isn't it?
Yeah, this is great. We speak to each other all the time.
Every day.
Now I get to grill you with questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I get to grill you with questions.
Yeah. Jessie thinks that this is her interviewing me, so.
Well, we'll see what happens at the end of this. You guys be the judge in the comments. Let us know.
So we decided to talk about something that is, I think, a really interesting topic for TA leaders, and something that I think separates generally the best leaders to average ones is their commerciality.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people look at TA as this very specific vertical and specialism, when actually you're just great TA leaders are great business leaders.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something to be really clear about. So we want to talk today about how you can become a commercial TA leader, and tips about how you think about things commercially and ways people can start acting more commercially and showing up more commercially in their day-to-day.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the first thing to talk about is your personal journey and how you transitioned to become more commercial. What spurred that on? Was there something that you realized in your career that pushed you to do that, or a moment in time that really inspired you to become more commercial?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think I'm going to tell you something like an embarrassing story. If you're ready, straight first answer is an embarrassing story.
Go for it.
So I didn't pick to get into the industry that we're in, which is not the embarrassing thing. I think a lot of people get into HR or people or TA or something without planning necessarily to do it. But the reason I actually ended up doing it is because I got 2 job offers when I finished uni. One was in HR at BHP Billiton, and one was in a publishing house, actually. So I studied communications. And I made the decision to take the HR one because I was dating this boy I didn't want to move away from. The reason I mention this is I don't think I ever really consciously was people and talent is the thing I want to do. And actually embarrassingly unmotivated by it, I think, to some degree. But I really liked the work. And I think the reason I think the fact that I didn't come from this background actually ended up making me better at it in the long run, because I didn't have any preconceived ideas about what the CIPD or SHRM was telling me about what it needed to look like. And I was just learning from people. I had a very different degree. It was in communications, and I obviously have my law degree. And the things I was interested in were kind of more about how do systems work together, and what are we actually trying to achieve together as a group? So I was really lucky in my first job at BHP. My manager was also very similar. She really encouraged me to kind of be curious about what's happening in other parts of the business. I did a big rotation program. So it really allowed me to have the space of, I never really had someone coming down and saying this is the HR box or this is the talent box. And I think that freedom to be curious and also the lack of preconceived notions about what this function needed to be really helped me kind of be more interested in what was happening in other parts of the business and see it as a broader system of which I was just a part.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously, throughout my career that just got, more and more strong. I think a big part of what I talk about now is really how to learn from other functions about how to do this work really well. And I think all those things just combined into the realization that you've just said, which is if you're really good at your job, it almost doesn't matter what your specialism is. There is a common thread between all people that I think are fantastic leaders of their departments, and that is that they are incredibly good with teams and people and help lead people collectively in an effective way, and that they genuinely understand the goals and incentives of the business as well.
Mm-hmm. And you did communications degree, and then you did a law degree later on.
Yeah.
And how long have you been in a kind of HRTA career before you decided to do the law degree?
I think it was maybe even like 7 years.
Okay.
It was a long time. But I went back to do it because I was originally going to do law. And then everyone kept telling me that like it's really scary and you're going to be studying for like millions of years and it's super hard. And I was like, oh no, I was 17. So I was like, hell no, I'm not doing that. So I shifted into communications, journalism and communications. But I always regretted the decision. And I was like, I was so interested in it, especially as I did more work in TA and HR and started like kind of getting a little bit more broad. I desperately wanted to not be stuck into the HR lady box where you just like end up kind of implementing policies. And also, and you know this about me, I'm like, I hate not knowing something and I hate having to like rely on other people and not having all the information, like not in a super controlling way, but maybe in a little bit of a controlling way. And I just thought that this is one area I was like, I could go and do an MBA or I could just go back and do my law degree, which I think is going to be super helpful, especially for the size and scale of companies that I've kind of specialized in. And will teach me a lot. So yeah.
Was that a conscious effort for you to be more broad and more commercial?
Yeah.
And were you thinking about stepping into a different part of the business, different roles when you did that? Or were you still thinking, I'm going to utilize that in my HRTA role?
So I really wanted to get more broad and I felt like my background and history was holding me back from doing that. And I think it's also other people's perceptions of HR and TA just as much as it was potentially myself. And we can talk a bit about both those things, I guess. But I think an MBA is an awesome option. And a lot of people talk about doing MBAs to kind of broaden themselves out of HR or TA. But for me, I felt like, a law degree is one of those things, it's such a commercial asset because you need to really understand like complicated problems in a business that generally businesses are willing to outsource to extreme cost to try and solve them. And I was like, well, that seems like an opportunity for me. If I can save a company money and be a bit more of a weapon, I talk about being a weapon in ops all the time, then this is a good option in a way that I just felt like an MBA was going to be stuff I probably already had a lot of exposure to.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, that's really interesting. So for people who maybe are in roles and they're not, for whatever reason, going to go and leave and do a part-time career course or part-time MBA, what are ways that they can maybe in their day-to-day roles start being more commercial? Like, how would you advise people to do that?
Talentful provides flexible recruiting solutions to the world's most ambitious companies. Are you thinking about ways to add flexibility to your talent function? With recent market volatility and hiring set to return to growth mode in the near future, there's never been a better time to choose the right partner to help you scale. Talentful's embedded sourcing, recruiting, coordination, and talent advisory services have been trusted by the world's leading brands. Companies such as Atlassian, Microsoft, Expedia, Pinterest, Waymo, and more. Whether you're hiring across engineering, go-to-market, or G&A, Talentful has got you covered. To find out how Talentful can help you, visit talentful.com.
I think I'm going to give the framing of the same thing that I talk about in almost every single podcast, which is the idea of the people ops as a product kind of headspace. I think it's really helpful. So I have this kind of concept I talk about in my book, which is that every company is building 3 products. You have the customer-facing product or your like kind of public-facing product, and that is like raises if your hiring raises, or podcast studios if your podcast studios, whatever it is, right? Office locations if your WeWork. And a lot of your companies spending their time kind of centered on developing and improving that product and the experience for your customers.
Mm-hmm.
You also have a fiscal product, like a financial instrument, and that financial instrument exists for your venture capitalists if you've got VC backing, or it's a shareholders. They're buying into something, right? You buy shares because it's a product that you're trying to kind of get some kind of benefit out of. And then the final product you're building is this employee experience. And all these 3 things are symbiotic to each other. If you have an incredible consumer-facing product that's really smashing it, then hopefully you've got better investment opportunities, whether that be, private equities knocking at your door, you've got venture capitalists knocking at your door, just your share value goes up. And then with that capital, hopefully you can deploy it into really high quality talent, very aligned with your mission, pay them more, kind of give them better benefits and opportunities. And the happier and more engaged your employees are, we all know, then hopefully the better consumer-facing product you're going to build. So a very symbiotic relationship between the 3 of them.
Mm-hmm.
And in my opinion, I think the kind of king product is the fiscal product, right? You really want to make your company worth as much as possible, because if that is true and you're getting really high quality investment, then inevitably the rest of the products will succeed and be really valuable.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a reasonable argument that your employee experience is a very strong kind of second to that for a lot of people. But if you have that headspace where you're like, so there's these 3 products that are really in service of the company's valuation or the share valuation or more investment or runway or whatever you want to see your outcome of the fiscal product being, that automatically puts you in a headspace where you have to understand those codependent relationships between the 3 of them. Now, I'm not saying everyone in TA needs to go away and become an expert at like board relations,
Mm-hmm.
but you do need to understand that the outcome of the work that you are doing in building an incredible employee experience product and having a really high ELTV to CAC payback ratio is that your company is worth more money,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that headspace and like kind of thinking about it through that lens is already a really good first step to take to become more commercial. So you aren't just a person there providing a service to a company that it needs to like just ostensibly keep running, but you're a person providing a service to a product that is crucial in making your company's valuation as high as possible.
And so I guess the first step on that is really understanding what the objectives are of the business.
Yeah.
And really finding a way to impact those objectives with your team.
Yeah.
Would you say? And what do you think are the main blockers behind people not doing that now or not getting that information?
Yeah. I actually do think that TA is probably some of the best in the kind of people and talent space at being very outcome orientated. And that's because it is easier. It's a funnel, right? So it's very similar to a sales funnel or a marketing funnel when there's a very clear objective at the end of it, which is to have someone hired, right? At a low cost or whatever. There's a few other incentives there as well. So I do think TA is actually better than a lot of other parts of the business and the people and talent space of doing this kind of work. However, I think there's a couple of things. I think there is still a tendency in people and talent to be a little input orientated. So like, oh, we need to have a new EVP. Why? Well, because our cost per hire is too high? No. Because it takes too long to hire someone? No. Like being able to understand like, why are we doing this? What are we actually trying to affect is really like helpful. And I think the second thing is, and this is particularly true, I think even more for TA than it is for HR, TA is kind of the last to know about a lot of things very often. And they are kind of relegated to the place of you are just the output generators. You just bring people into the company within these parameters. Often after the company's even decided on like which geographies they want to hire into and which roles they want to hire and why and what's the thing they're working on. TA sometimes isn't even privy into all of those decisions or even part into like feeding into should we do this, shouldn't we do it, how much it's going to cost, what are the trade-offs, what's the market there like, what's the potential quality of these candidates in these markets going to be, blah, 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 blah. So I think that the fact that they are rarely involved in the higher level parts of the decision process ends up with them kind of being put into a role where they're just doing their own goals and not the company goals. Does that make sense?
Definitely. I think that's definitely been a key theme. And I think we've seen it over the last few years where, disproportionately teams have been impacted. It's like, well, we don't need you anymore. We don't need you to make the output, which is the hire. So we don't need you at all.
Yeah.
And there's no value other than the output. So, and part of me is conflicted. Like, is that a business requirement? If I'm a business leader, I'm thinking, okay, I need to make profit. I need to make sure that this business is sustainable. Is it just a natural conclusion that if I have no hiring, I should not be spending any money on hiring? And is there a way to overcome that as a talent leader and position yourself in a way where you are providing value above and beyond just the hire? So, what would be the best way? And I'm not expecting to have like a clear answer on this, but it would be good to talk about is for a TA leader to be in a position that when hiring goes to zero, that their team are protected somewhat or they're providing value to the business.
Yeah.
Do they have to start blending into other parts of the business and taking on more responsibility other than just, hiring? What's the solve there?
So I think this is interesting. Like, we just talked about the idea that like hiring is a funnel, and the funnel actually, in my opinion, starts way before, like think about like sales and marketing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sales and marketing's job doesn't start when an email comes into their inbox.
Mm-hmm.
And like, admittedly, one big difference here is like, you're always looking for new customers. You aren't always looking for new employees, right? So yeah, we're acknowledging that dichotomy, but sales and marketing are doing work well and truly ahead of that in order to enable their process. They're like doing market mapping and understanding like, if we were to be making like decisions to hire these customers bring these customers rather than bringing these customers, we know that these customers have a better customer lifetime value, but they actually cost a little bit more. So maybe we should do some preemptive work to try and get better value customers earlier, blah, 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 right? There's like these kind of strategic things that are happening all the time in sales and marketing. Those two things traditionally, really not in every business, but for a lot of businesses haven't been happening in TA because they're flat strap. When TA's in the seat, they're in the hot seat and they're being demanded to like bring as many hires as possible. And there's actually all this amazing other value adding work that is really beneficial to making way more valuable long-term employment bets, because that's really what it is, right? It's an investment you're making into a person. That I think TA should be involved in way earlier on. Like they should be involved in conversations about expanding into new geographies. What's the market look like in those regions? Whether or not we think we're going to have a good quality of employee based on our current compensation methodology. The fact that TA, in my opinion, was never really involved in performance conversations blew my mind, because if there's one person in your company that's exceptional at telling you whether someone fits a brief or doesn't fit a brief, or is matching a criteria or not matching a criteria, who are you going to go to? You go to TA. So the fact that this like connection between hiring and performance is also regularly dropped. I think all these places, but I mean, also the other thing as well is like, obviously the last couple of years, it's extreme. Like companies were genuinely on the brink of really disastrous outcomes. So I don't blame them for making really kind of rapid decisions about how they reduce costs and reduce headcount. But I think what you're doing and reflecting on like, were we right to be as kind of intense about the choices we made in TA? I think that's actually a really important question to ask. And I think a lot of people would prefer to say, yeah, because we were running out of money otherwise, and not actually think, well, what could have been different? What could have happened now that we're seeing the market come back?
Yeah, I think a lot of it for me is it feels like the hands that people had, they did the best that they could with them last year, but they weren't in a great position to handle a downturn in the first place. So that means they didn't have the right strategy in the first place. And maybe that's a symptom of all what we're talking about, that TA weren't in the room. They couldn't talk about and be effectively planning for what happens if we lose X% of our headcount. Have we got a system that can handle that? Do we have flexibility in our teams that flex down if we need to? And really be thinking through those scenarios rather than just being handed, here's 100 recs, go and fill them. I think that maybe you could have missed a lot of the errors that you made last year if you would have had more strategic conversations about what can go wrong. But yeah, I don't think that those mistakes hopefully will get made again. But
it's interesting. I think there's a lot of people that I'm watching that are just rebuilding their teams exactly as they had them before. And I'm like, there's nothing, like was it just a weird year that you're cookie cutting out of your life and going straight back to how it was? Because that seems wild to me. I think that we get asked all the time, we're interviewing actively at the moment. If you want to come and work at Talentful, please do. But we're interviewing actively at the moment, and the frequency of which the question comes up is like, what are you doing differently now that you weren't doing back in 2021? So candidates are interested to know what's changed. And I think if you're a person that your answer is, oh, nothing, we're just rehiring the same team in the exact same shape with no changes, like I think that's probably going to be a red flag to a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, it feels like the opposite of effective strategy.
Yeah.
Like what's the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. Feels a little bit like that. I don't know what rationale you would ever have to do the same thing again based on what happened, unless your company just didn't face any issues and you're just like, oh yeah, we can wade our way through this and not have any impact. But
even then, if you're looking around at like kind of chaos in the market, sure, you're like, maybe we should also be aware of this and make sure we're doing some things differently too. Not just like, well, I guess we're safe.
Yeah.
Like,
we're never going to face any downturn.
Yeah, we're never going to see an issue.
Yeah. Well, they'll probably learn to regret it, I guess. So if you were in a TA leader position right now, what do you think are the main things you'd be doing to show value in your organization and show commerciality? They're like key things that people can really focus on with their leadership, or ways they show up that can advance them in those conversations.
So, I do a lot of like kind of advising and mentoring and talking to people in the same space that we're in. And I am kind of pretty constantly surprised by how many pretty senior leaders and people in talent you ask like basic business awareness questions to, like what's your EBITDA, or like, do you know what your burn rate is, or what was your last investment round, what's your valuation? And I get like, oh, I wouldn't know, I have to ask finance, or I'm not really sure, or I can't remember last time we talked about it. And that already is like, that's like the number one thing is if you're sitting here listening to this and you're like, oh, I probably couldn't tell you what our basic financials are, then how are you making good decisions in your team, right? Like if someone comes to you and says you want to hire 150 people, are you just going like, that's awesome, and have no idea about what implications that's going to have to the profitability of certain departments, or, why are we hiring those people? What are they going to be doing? What are they trying to achieve? And not just what are they trying to achieve in their roles, but what is this whole initiative trying to achieve financially, as well as like, move to India or open this new area or support this new client, whatever, right? So I think that's like the number one thing is like genuinely have an interest and want to know about the financials. Now, I know there are a lot of people and talent leaders that are kept out of those conversations or told like you don't need to have that information. I would really push that like you need it to make good decisions, and like try and find someone to advocate for that being the truth. And then I think the other thing as well is like kind of similar to what we just spoke about before, hiring is one part of a kind of a product funnel that people go into, or an investment funnel really. Like you bring someone in, you're paying like without a doubt, whatever type of company you are, it's almost certain that headcount is the biggest line item on your P&L. It's going to be at least 60% for the majority of SaaS companies. And if you're a services company, even higher. And your job is essentially to like bring in those investments into your P&L. Well, how effective is that investment? Is it like, and not on an individual basis, not like, oh, we made this amazing hire as the VP of engineering who everyone loves, but like the investment portfolio that you have brought these people into, is it successful by and large? Like what are the themes that you can unpick there? If you're spending, I don't know, $1 million a month on headcount, like is that actually delivering 3-4x value? And where are the places that are delivering really strong value? And maybe that is genuinely in sales, you can have like a revenue to headcount kind of measure, but maybe there's other places you can say like, their ability to expand and renew accounts. And I think wanting to understand like what happens after you put that person into their seat after they've passed probation in the system of the company is actually like, even just being able to have those conversations with leaders, I think is already going to make you a much more valuable person to be bringing into conversations. And I think you'll probably find a few more doors open to you if that's the way you start speaking.
And how much do you think like politics comes into advancing commercially as a leader? Something that not a lot of people talk about. And I'm not sure, people think of politics in a negative way a lot.
Tell me about this. What do you mean?
Well, that gets brought up quite a lot. There's politics, right?
Yeah.
Level. And people vying to be positioned in a certain way, or being seen in a certain way, or having a perception of them be a certain way. How much of that do you think, advances someone's either career or ability to ascend through an organization and be a commercial leader? It's impossible for someone to be perceived badly who is generating more money for a company.
No, I don't think that's true. I think maybe there's a difference between perception and politics.
Right.
But I think, I mean, we all know them, people that you've worked with in the past, maybe like not at Talentful, maybe somewhere else, but like who you're like, the thing that you care about is your perception, your empire, your team, your CV, your projects. I think that is innately disconnected from being commercial, because actually what really caring about like the commercialities, the money printing part of the business means is, yes, you still have to be a nice person. Yes, you still have to be good to work with. Yes, you still need to be good at your job and blah, 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 blah. But ultimately, if you're doing what is aligned with the company being more successful, sometimes it's just going to mean doing stuff that's kind of boring or, not particularly fun, or actually kind of really challenging and negative to do, or shrinks your team at the benefit of another team. And if you are happily going into all of that because you know it's for the greater good, then I think that is the kind of perfect example of someone that isn't putting politics ahead of the company, which is commercials.
Mm-hmm. What do you think to companies that have like, SpaceX that's saying that the objective is to fly rockets to Mars?
Yeah.
Do you think that their ultimate objective is really to make money? Is that what it? And
They're private, right? Or they're an org.
They're private, I believe. But do you think they're flying rockets to eventually make money? That's the end goal. Really.
Okay, well, thinking about it from the product mindset, right? Let's say you're an investor in SpaceX.
Yeah.
Are you investing because you want them to fly rockets to the moon, or are you investing because you want your shares to be worth 10x?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I know what the answer is because you and I talk about investing, but like, I'm not investing in, like, otherwise it's called donating, isn't it?
Yeah. So ultimately, and I think this is the simplicity of every business. The objective for every business is to create a product that people want and generates profit and can scale. That is it. And you have to be aligned and aware of that objective at all times, even if it means you're not doing things that you always want to all the time.
Yeah.
And then what about when the objectives of the business maybe are misaligned with the goals that you have? How should a leader handle those situations?
Mm-hmm. I think something would, you and I have talked so much about goals over the last couple of months. Like, I think something has gone dangerously awry if one team is working on something that doesn't make any sense to what another team is working on. And this obviously increases with complexity the bigger the company is. And like, I think about the goal setting process at Box or Goldman. And Goldman's different because it's very revenue-based goals. Everyone's basically got revenue goals. But, think about Box, where you're still doing R&D, where I used to work. Like that goal setting process is so much more complex than one we have at Talentful, my whereby. So it's easy for us to see, I think, where one person's running in one direction, someone's running in another one. And maybe someone's listening to this and they were at like a 13,000, 20,000 person company. And like that is because that system is very hard to navigate. And I think, you need to take a different approach probably to how to solve this. But if you're in a company where you can genuinely see, I'm working on this and they're working on this and these two things seem misaligned, like the goal setting system is at fault there. Somewhere something's broken. I'll give you a good example. When I was at Wonderbly, we set our OKRs. We did OKRs. We're a Google Ventures business. So we had like the full traditional structure of OKRs, and somehow something had happened where the marketing team's job was to expand to as many regions as possible. And then over in ops, their job was to keep this cost of shipping a product, COGS, as low as possible. Now, obviously I'm leading here, but it's pretty obvious what probably is going to happen if marketing is deciding they can send to as many locations in the world as possible. Marketing started sending it to like Kathmandu and Tasmania and like the far reaches of some Bolivian beach. The operations team are receiving these orders and they're like, why is it costing us $79 to post something? And then it became very clear that those two goals were like in distinct opposition of each other. You can't send to every country in the world and independently have a separate goal somewhere else in your business to keep COGS as low as possible unless these two teams are having active conversations together. And those same things pop up from time to time in people and talent, right? I think this particularly happens when people and talent teams don't talk well to each other. And it's places where, for example, the talent team has like, very, very structured time to hire metrics, for example, or time to fill metrics. But then the people operations team is given very explicit instructions that they want to have like certain levels of probations being passed or certain levels of like performance within the first round of their onboarding or something, right? And then all of a sudden you start seeing like someone's goal has to fall apart. Yeah. So I think having those two teams to talk is really important.
And you were talking before about the fundamental purpose of business is to make money in basic terms. But in talent acquisition and people, that is a very human-centric organization.
Yeah.
We're in a service business where you've got a lot of people, and that can sometimes not seem the most motivating of factors for folks. And objectives that are driving towards that one outcome. How do you, as a leader, take people on that journey, get people excited about that, and get them to buy into the commercial vision, and I guess get them on board with that. Maybe get your team to think more commercially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. Like revenue goals aren't motivating to people except for salespeople generally.
Mm-hmm.
Most people look at it like, this quarter we're trying to make X revenue, and they're like, okay, I'm not getting it. So you know what I mean? But I think having people understand where they fit in the system is motivating, right? Like a lot of frustrations that you see from people is generally that they don't understand why decisions are being made.
Mm-hmm.
And as you and I know, hopefully if it's a good decision, it's being made because commercials are being thought about. There's some reason, like either you're spending too much, or you're spending not enough in a certain area, or you're not earning enough, or like whatever it is, right? Basically, most problems are going to boil down to those two things. Now, people come and say, I'm feeling disengaged because I don't understand why we made this decision. I think if you've got a good basis of people feeling like the company's doing something ultimately that's meaningful and that they feel like they're being appreciated, then you're already in like a kind of nice neutral place where
Mm-hmm.
people like, I like the mission of the company that we're trying to get to. We're not like, we're not having some machine that crushes children on the street. We're doing something positive for the world, hopefully. Good. Then the next thing is, well, you don't want people to feel disillusioned with what they're doing because you're making decisions because of commercial things they don't understand. So I think it's them becoming articulate and explaining to your team, if someone comes to you and says, I really feel the pressure, I want to hire someone else in our team, I'm really stressed, I'm overwhelmed. And you come back and say, we're not doing it. Just leaving it at that is not helpful for somebody. Or, go to someone in your hiring team says, I really want to hire this new engineer. They're a super priority for me. It's really important. My team is very stressed that this thing's happening. And you say, at the moment, that's not a priority hire. Well, why? I think is really important. And not just saying it's not a priority hire because sales needs hiring right now,
Mm-hmm.
but instead saying it's not a priority hire because sales needs hiring right now, because remember those OKRs that we set? Well, if sales doesn't hit the requisite revenue numbers, then unfortunately what that's going to mean is that we're not going to be able to do X, Y, Z, which means we can't deploy into the engineering team.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a chance that in 3 months' time, these roles actually get completely deprioritized if sales aren't hired by the 3rd of September.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you're able to give all of that context and help them understand the throughputs of why decisions are being made, what ends up happening is, again, I don't think you're going to make someone be like, wow, I love working for a company that cares about making sure we hit our revenue goals. But you will have someone that says, well, I still really care about what I'm doing. And clearly decisions being made in the best interest of everyone to try and make the company more successful. And I understand where I fit in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And ultimately, everyone loves being in a company that's winning and growing and signing more business. And it seems obvious, but I don't feel people necessarily put the jigsaw pieces together that if a company grows and makes more revenue, that opens up more opportunity for them
Mm-hmm.
and more opportunity for everyone inside the business.
Yeah. It's tough though, because the last couple of years, people
Yeah.
haven't been having those kinds of commercial discussions with their team.
Yeah.
And I do think people at the moment are a little like, I don't know, what do you think? I think people are a little Pavlovian dogged into like the second you start talking about financials, people start being like, oh,
Yeah.
it's going to be bad news. And like this is even just outside of recruitment, like in SaaS, same deal.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that there's probably some work to do into like making sure we get people back to feeling like they can be happy and positive news inside those commercial discussions.
Yeah. I think a lot of it though is, a lot of the workforce, this is their first in-job recession.
Yeah.
And I think that once you've got one under your belt, the next one is not as scary.
Well, that's a
Or
nice positive
Yeah.
little.
Yeah, but at least you understand what's happening, and it's not like the end of the world. It's painful and it's not good, but it's inevitability, and
Yeah.
that you're never going to go for 20 years of a career and not face one of these situations, or probably multiple of these situations.
So you started your career in the 2008 recession,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Same. Mm.
So I didn't actually feel any impact. I was at the early stage of my career, so it was like
Did you struggle to get a job?
no.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, my agency just started like right at the.
But you were like hammering the phones.
Yeah, exactly.
What a job.
But so I didn't really feel it. This COVID and this recession has been the first one that I've really like felt. Probably more than most. But definitely, if it happens again, like the way I will feel about it and the way I'll react to it will be totally different. And I think that's the same for everyone else that's just gone through it for the first time. And because it's unexpected, you don't really know what's happening. You don't know why decisions are being made. You don't know that it's going to get better. And I think that it's just context and having that experience of,
Yeah.
okay, one of these is going to come around every decade, you know, and it's going to last for a year or so, and then we'll be back to normal.
Yeah. I think standing at the like forefront of your career, you expect, you know, there's going to be highs and lows, and you probably know what the highs are going to look like because they're very well like documented, right? You probably know you're going to work for a company that hopefully is growing and doing well. You probably know that you're going to get promotions.
Mhm.
It's really hard to predict what the lows are going to look like. Like you can predict I'm probably going to get laid off, which of course I've definitely been laid off. I'm not sure if you ever have had a layoff before, but it's not a great experience, obviously. But you don't know what that's going to be caused by. And I don't think these down periods always take the same shape.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that as more people grow in their careers and they have to manage through these situations, I think they have a bit more of an empathy and understanding. You know, no one wants to be like, I'm a manager and I had to lay people off, poor me. But it is actually really hard to go through. As you know, a lot of managers have had to have a real terrible couple of years, you know, having conversations they don't want to have with their people, you know, having to lay people off that they're friendly with, that they brought into the company, they've developed, they've grown them. And then through no fault really of their own, they've had to make these decisions and conversations. And I think if you've gone through that yourself, you have a bit more of an understanding of people are generally trying to do their best and they're just dealing with the hand they're dealt. And it's not a personal thing. And, you know, it is just a commercial decision that has to happen for the company to survive most of the time. Yeah, there are definitely people who make massive messes of like redundancies and layoffs, and they do it in a very, very bad way. But I think for the most part, especially in tech, people try very hard to do a good process.
I think by and large in my life, people try and do a good, like I've met very few people in any business that has genuinely cared little about making sure they're doing right by people in good times and bad.
Yeah. And I guess for the commerciality point, there are only, but you can only work in the parameters that you are able to. You know, some companies that have raised a ton of money and have lots of expendable cash, or maybe they're generating billions of dollars of revenue, they can give much bigger packages and much nicer, you know, exits to people. You know, a startup that is barely clinging on, that's, you know, making it to the next funding round, they have to make really difficult decisions and they can't do a lot. And somehow, and I think the way that is viewed is this company didn't like us as much or didn't try as hard because they couldn't give us this big lavish package. But it's no, they just don't have the economics you know, to make it work. And I think again, you get more context on that stuff as you have to lead through this kind of change, and you have to understand the commercials. So I think, yeah, for a lot of people that went through this, it's like their first time. They weren't leading through it. They didn't have all the information, which is, of course, none of their fault. But I think as these people grow into leadership roles and they have to, you know, lead through it or give a different perspective.
Completely. I think like on the same thing with like the product thinking, right? It's like employment, in my opinion, is it's like a marketplace, right? You pick now where you want to go and work, and you pick based on your own priorities and what you want to see from your career and your life. And the marketplace is really diverse. It's way more diverse than it was when I entered employment back, you know, in Australia. We've got remote working now. You've got hybrid. You've got these like massive tech companies. You've got little startups that can employ people. You've got this crazy diversity of different size and shapes of businesses you want to work for. And, you know, obviously I'm mostly focusing on tech with this, but you are also making a choice. If you want to go and work for a FANG, like the cost of going working for a FANG is that you have to study really, really hard. You probably have to go to one of these like high level universities somewhere in the US. There's going to be a cost to get into that side of the market. If you don't want to pay that cost for that product, then maybe you take something else, or maybe actually you are perfectly capable of getting into a Google or a Netflix or whatever, but actually you make the decision for work-life balance reasons. You want to go into a smaller startup that's going to expect less of you. I'm not sure if that's actually true, but you know what I mean? Like you make choices based on what's available to you. Or maybe you want to be fully remote, so you decide to leave Meta because they don't want you to be fully remote anymore, right? You are, as much as any other consumer, making a hopefully very educated choice about what you would like to pay in terms of your own lifestyle in order to go into one of these experiences. And then again, on the commercial side of stuff, that also has a reality when it comes to how much compensation you're going to get, how aggressive the company is going to be about promotions and progression within it, how much availability there is for geographic working, and if you want to go be remote, or even if you want to move countries. Like, I think sometimes as well, like the expectation is that all companies should offer this kind of very homogenous blob of the same experience to people because that's what people would like to receive, without actually fully acknowledging that actually people have very different expectations for those experiences. And like the experience that you get working at Goldman Sachs, where I've been, versus Box it's a completely different product. And it's going to have very different implications commercially, just as much as it will in terms of just the day-to-day experience that you have as an employee.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people need to maybe consider that more. But to wrap things up, my final question. This has gone flying by. We've been nearly an hour.
Really?
Yeah. What are you most excited about regarding TA specifically and the future of TA?
Oh, just the upwards trajectory of Talentful over the I think this is a really interesting time generally, I think, for HR and talent more broadly, and like for a lot of functions. But like, we think about 1996 or whatever it was, like the Ulrich model got invented and we're all like doing like payroll. It was a very like administrative function. And then, in 2016, we had this massive shift where the Google kind of culture overdrive happened. Everyone had ping pong tables and snack walls and bean bags and everything going on in their offices. And then in 2020, we had another shift. Obviously, we realized that all that stuff we'd spent the last 4 or 5 years building didn't actually really matter because we were going remote and people wanted to leave these in-person experiences that we were creating and that we were selling into people and putting on our website, careers pages, and talking about it in interviews. And we had to find a new thing to talk about. And then a year later, so getting quicker and quicker and closer in proximity, a year later we have this downturn where so much pressure is put on the economics, like the value payback, the return on investment, ELTV to CAC, I talk about a lot. And TA was not kind of immune from that. They were either being let go because that value wasn't immediately obvious, or being pushed in to try and kind of reduce cost per hire and find cheaper places to hire, whatever it is. And now, of course, we have AI, which is massively, again, impacting that same conversation around return on investment and what can we do with more with less? What does it look like to have a smaller team? In short, I think what's really interesting is overall this crazy dramatic change, actually, when we really think about the day-to-day of our jobs, they haven't, yes, practically speaking, we now have Calendly and we now have Ashby and we blah, blah, blah. Those things have changed. But the way we set up our orgs is still almost exactly the same. Recruitment coordinators still exist. We still have somebody doing comp and ben in like a shared services center somewhere in a company. We still have like the Ulrich model still alive and well. And it really makes me think like, if not now, when? Like we should be seeing, I think, some really interesting innovation in terms of like how we're structuring teams, the actual practical applications of their jobs and the technologies that we're using. And I think we're at the kind of boiling point now where we're seeing some really interesting companies start to think about like, what does their core talent team look like? What is the auxiliary augmented parts of their businesses? How do we leverage technology and globalization now that remote working is so much part of our day-to-day? Can we partner with other countries? So I'm really excited about the future of not just the practical, but actually like, what does this mean for organizational design and how talent and people fits into the C-suite, the org, the team? Are they more embedded, et cetera, et cetera?
Cool.
Awesome.
Where can people find you? Tout the book.
Oh, the
socials.
book.
So you can beat me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, well, that's true. Chris and I have a very aggressive conversation. It's a competition really on LinkedIn right now where, no, but you can come follow me on LinkedIn, chat to me on LinkedIn. I'm terrible at responding to messages. But otherwise, reach out to the Talentful team, read my book if you're interested, Built for People. I've got a new book coming out.
Ooh.
You know about this?
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be out in like 2 years. So if you're listening to this, put a calendar event 2 years' time. New book's coming out.
Yeah, don't forget to check back in 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for tuning in. And don't forget to subscribe and like to see more episodes in the future. Thank you.